Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this Saturday, this lovely Saturday morning and afternoon. And of course, thank you, Julia, for being here. This means so much. I'm really excited to get into it.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited as well, and hopefully our discussion can be, have a lot of value for your audience.
Exactly, hopefully. So before we begin, just a few things. This episode will be recorded, so you can definitely rewatch this episode on our YouTube channel or on our website. Please just keep your cameras and your microphone off for the extent of the presentation and the session. And once we're done, you can turn it on to share your sketches if you want, and you could also turn on your microphone if you would like to speak to Julia. You can ask questions. Just put your questions in the chat box if you want to ask them right now so you don't forget. And we'll be sure to get to all of the questions at the end of the session. For your sketches, we'd love to see your sketches. So please, once you're done, if you could just take a quick photo and head over to Instagram and tag us or, mention us at layersofdesign_. You could also use the hashtag layersofsketches. And you can definitely connect with us on Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook. And for sure, you can check out all of our episodes and listen to all of our episodes, including this one, on all our streaming platforms. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and everything else. So as you know, this is Sketch It Out, and this is a series that's supposed to inspire guests with intriguing conversations while sketching a building of our guest's choice. Before we get into the episode, I would like to really remind you guys about our first annual event, which is Design X Community Rethinking Public Spaces. It's going to be on April 17th. And the whole idea of this event is to educate and inspire designers to think of creative solutions to public spaces for people experiencing homelessness. And for sure, we'll be giving back. So on the 18th, we're going to put together thoughtful kits and go out into our community to give to the homeless. So if you're interested in being a part, we have a design competition going on. We're going to have a virtual design seminar and the thoughtful kits on April 18th. So if you're interested in donating or being a part of the competition, head over to our website, layersofdesign.online, to be a part of it. So now to the main event. We have today with us Julia Nagale, and she is the principal and director of design at Hewitt, which is a firm based in Seattle. And she's also an affiliate assistant professor at University of Washington. So thank you so much, Julia. Thank you for coming on. And let's get right into it. So what got you into architecture and design?
Well, again, thank you for having me. And, what got me into architecture and design, gosh, so that's a little while ago now. I've kind of committed myself, but, I would say that I had always been interested in some sort of creative field, right? I grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania, so far away from Seattle, Washington. But, in my experience in school, in high school, undergraduate school was at Lehigh University, and my graduate program was at the University of Maryland, College Park. Like a lot of people from Northeast Pennsylvania, when we go to school, we're thinking about, getting a good education. We're also thinking about, how can that education provide us with the skills to, have employment for your life and doing something that you really enjoy. And so I think I was naturally inclined to sort of pursue architecture for a lot of those, very fundamental reasons. I had an art teacher in high school, Joseph Schetz. He was one of those kinds of teachers that I think I really resonated with. And I think many of us have that kind of experience where we really have a teacher that inspired you, that you really got interested and excited about the content that they were teaching. He was very serious about art and also taught drafting, but taught it in a way that, developed your analytical skills, developed skills for just thinking about what you're doing and not necessarily developing skills on learning how to draw and represent things that are in front of you, but understanding how that can be a tool for learning, how that can be a tool for exploration and analysis. So it kind of I think his approach sort of lent itself well to the field of architecture, which I really liked. I had some significant opportunities and some doors were open for me. So I was very lucky in a way that I have I had a lot of people in my family where a creative field was sort of a family value. I had a grandfather who was in engineering and was very creative in the work that he did. A lot of it was for the Air Force and Navy, and thinking about components, in this case rotor bearings, things like that, for the modern day helicopter and some space programs as well. Certain components within that really complex engineering efforts. And so that was really valued in my in my family. I had a grandmother who was an MD in 1939. So, women who had a profession, and I think in her case, she's sort of an early person of balancing that work-life career, having 5 children and having a professional, a career like an MD. So I had that as role models. I also had an uncle who was an architect and had a firm in Philadelphia, and opened a significant door for me and gave me my first job when I was 17 out of high school, working in his office to kind of understand and learn a little bit about architecture before I went to undergraduate school. So, I think a lot of stories, people have helped along the way. And I think those were sort of some significant, amounts of help that I had. And that's what got me interested in pursuing architecture and sort of where I am today, I suppose.
Oh, nice, very nice. It seems like, you've always had that influence of architecture around you. So you're also a professor at the University of Washington. Can you tell us about that? Like, why did you decide to become a professor?
I love to teach, and I learned that almost by happenstance. This is I think it was another moment where someone had made a suggestion to me in passing, and I listened to them. At the University of Maryland in College Park, during your thesis semester, I was a teaching assistant for drawing, and for a couple of semesters while I was a graduate student at the University of Maryland. And in your last semester in that program, when you were doing your thesis work, you had the ability to apply to be a teaching assistant, where you would lead an undergraduate design studio, about 20 students, under the guidance of a professor. But you had to apply for it. I was not going to apply for it. I just felt like the workload of doing my thesis and then teaching 3 days a week in a studio that was 4 hours or so, or something like that, would be just too much. But I had a professor, Brian Kelly. He suggested, I think you should probably try to do this. You might really like it. You might find that having this opportunity, having this experience, might serve you well, in the future. And he was absolutely right. I did like, and I really enjoy seeing students develop. I like this idea of, you enter a semester, or in the case of University of Washington, they're on a quarter system. So you enter a quarter, and you don't know really who the students are. You know what the content and the coursework will be. I'm curious to see where they're going to take their approach, and where their project and where their course of study will go by the end of the quarter. It's sort of like, reading a book and you don't know the end of the story, but it's a really good book and you're interested and you want to find out what happens at the end of the story. And you're just sort of trying to guide them in the directions in which they want to go. And I learned that from having that opportunity at University of Maryland in the graduate program. And the reason that I was offered a position to be teaching a graduate design studio was, I enjoyed asking questions about students' work, and when I participated in juries at the school occasionally, it was I think there was a sense that a rapport that I would have with a student and their work, and trying to understand where they came from, and asking them questions and being curious about the work, as well as offering up any kind of observations or insights that might be helpful for them. That was a useful thing, and they extended me an offer to teach there, and I just really like the sort of the energy, the enthusiasm, and the curiosity that the students have, and it's been a lot of fun. So I do that double duty in the fall, my job at the office, and then teaching graduate design studio. It's a big commitment, and I have a good support in my family that supports me wanting to do that, because it'll be late dinners and I'll be tired, and all of those things still happen.
Definitely. So you are a principal, right? And the director of design at Hewitt, and you're also a professor. So what does leadership and mentorship mean to you as a principal and a professor?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I'd almost sort of break that apart into a couple of different questions. Leadership and mentorship are sort of different things, and I think they do represent and express themselves differently in the office than they would, in the studio at school. So as director of design for the architecture studio at Hewitt, at Hewitt we're 3 different studios. We have architecture, landscape architecture, and we also have transportation that focuses their work on light rail stations and other mass transit projects. So my partner Sean and I that lead the architecture studio, I'm the director of design of the architecture studio. So I've always been a designer, and I have never been a project manager. I think I would probably be a terrible project manager. It takes a certain kind of skill that, even when I'm trying to schedule myself, I seem to sort of fall short sometimes in doing some of the basic things you'd want to do in project management. So when you talk about leadership, I would almost separate it out from managing, right? And with leadership, for right, wrong, or indifferent, I think I rely on leading by example and setting tone more than anything else. And the example and tone that I set has probably been learned behaviors that I've had throughout the years of my own lived experience and what has worked for me, and sort of passing that along to the teams day in and day out. So for me, leadership is more about setting example and tone day in and day out than maybe sort of overarching sort of policies or something like that. We have core values in our architecture studio, right? We have 3 core values, which is be smart, be creative, and be principled. And they're really based upon, I think, what's worked well for us, for me, and for my partner Sean Ludvigsen. In that, when we're asking people to be smart, we're asking them, we don't care about your IQ and what kind of test scores you had. We're asking you to command with authority the responsibilities of the tasks that you're assigned to and your specific role, which falls under the category if you do what I do for living in the studio, or whether you're an accountant or you or an entry level designer, or whether you're a seasoned architect in our office. It all applies, is to command with authority your responsibilities. Be out in front of everybody with the specific things that you are responsible for. And that leads to our second core value at Hewitt, which is be creative. So then once you command all of the things that you are tasked with being responsible for, then you can find unique opportunities that weren't easily seen when you first started, right? The creativity can come into play if you have full command of your responsibilities. And we want people to be creative. And in our values, we're trying to set up or remove any barriers that would lead you to think, like, if you're an accountant, you can think of, is there creative ways to think about invoicing? As much as is there creative ways about designing structures and designing, things in the built environment. And then be principled, treat people as you'd want to be treated yourself, and those really basic things. So even though we have our core values, those are an expression of kind of how I see it day in and day out, right? Couple of stories of how that might manifest itself. Setting tone, right? A couple of years ago, we were working on this project called the Emerald, which is a 40-story tower, and it was a really unique situation. Our office at Hewitt is in downtown Seattle. We're right next to Pike Place Market, for those of you that are familiar with Seattle. And we had the opportunity to, which was my first skyscraper, first plus 100-meter building.
Wow.
And it was across the alley from my window. So the site was like next door to our office. So what a unique opportunity. Now, it's a really challenging site in that it's a wonderful place to be in the city. That's why our office is there, being next to Pike Place Market, being in the downtown core, being next to Belltown neighborhood in city Seattle. It's a really great place to be. And so that's why when you have these challenging sites that were only, in this case, 7,340 square feet at the base of the building, which is really for a 40-story building, small compared to the towers nearby. And was also irregularly shaped because the grids of Seattle sort of rotate along following the water line of Elliott Bay. But so this really challenging project. We spent a couple of years on this project designing it. All the permits were in place. This happens in the kind of work that we do. The project changed ownership hands. Mm. And we worked on this really, really difficult project, right? And it's really small site, regular shaped, had parking below grade, had retail lobby on the first level, had parking above grade, and then since it's mixed use residential towers, places for people to live above that. So all of the vertical systems, elevators, stairs, trash chutes, shafts, all of these things have to track all the way through the building, but these different programs that are layered on top of one another really wanted all of those vertical systems to be in different places depending on the program. So to weave that stuff together was incredibly challenging for us and our team. And when it changed ownership hands, they had different ideas about the internal program. So they wanted us, since we had the permits in place, they wanted us to double the number of the units in the building to make more places for people to live and to have more affordability in the project. They wanted to remove all the above grade parking and make it for places for people to live. And that's all fantastic. That was doing the right thing from creating active street edges. It was really great decisions on the new ownership team, but all of these years of work is like gone, right?
Oh, wow.
So people worked really hard on this, but I thought this was just fantastic. This is the opportunity to set an example, set the tone, to say that we've got this. This is going to be a great idea. So we had a delete party. So in our studio, and since I grew up, I teach drawing and stuff, but I grew up with computers and AutoCAD, and I worked in AutoCAD and MicroStation and SketchUp and all of these things that we all use. I use Revit every day. And we sort of huddled informally around this computer. And there's this one man, Alex, who was responsible for this one stairwell. They had to weave between all of these different program pieces. And so let's grab all for those that use Revit, let's grab all of the elements in the Revit model. And then in that little, indicator in the lower right-hand part of your screen, it's thousands of elements. It'll tell you like the number of elements it grabs, right? And everything's highlighted blue from like level 7 down. And Alex hit delete, right?
Oh my gosh.
And so we hit delete, we have backup models, but he hit delete and it's all gone. And it's my job to say, this is fantastic and it's going to be great. And we've done this before, we'll solve it again. It's better for the city, it's better for the street, it's what our clients want, and this is going to be just great. So leadership by example, that example of setting that tone that we can do this again, and this is the right thing to do. And it's another opportunity to make a better building. And so we should be all over it and be happy. And anything that we learned about struggling with solving the problems before, I will tell people all the time, that's money in the bank. You will take that experience with you. That doesn't go away. If the building itself goes away, the experience of solving those problems don't go away. The confidence that you gain in solving tough problems don't go away. You still get to keep all of that. And so there's a lot of value in that. So that's like leadership by example. Mentorship, that's, teaching in some ways is mentorship. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons that I like to teach is that I, can, for a lot of both men and women, just to say, that the kind of work that we do at Hewitt, these sort of maybe larger, urban projects in the fabric, what I call the fabric of the city, which is driven by private side real estate economics mostly. That's that fabric that is different from the signature kinds of moments in the city, like museums or sporting arenas or civic spaces. When you're doing mixed-use commercial and mixed-use residential projects, it's in that fabric, and most of the city is the fabric. And so going to school and representing, trying to be innovative and creative within that fabric, I think is important for students to see. And how do we achieve that at Hewitt, and sharing those kinds of stories. Because I think a lot of the things that we look at in school might be more of those signature structures. And at the University of Washington, we like last quarter that I taught, it was they were doing mixed-use residential buildings in the neighborhood, thinking about all the same things we think about at the office. So I think they're getting a really good education in that regard. And they also see like what leadership looks like, design leadership in our office. And that's, I represent the design leadership with the architecture studio. I think that's important for both men and women to see that. And then I just share, because I'm a practitioner, I like to share stories like the Delete Party story. If you're teaching, I'm so like energized by the students that I teach. They're so eager to learn. Occasionally you'll have a person, I think they get really, they really like an idea and maybe it's not working. And you're trying to sort of, have a conversation about why, you think that maybe it's not getting the most out of the project. And, you sort of go back and forth, and, I might share some stories about like, well, this is how I would work it out. I've had similar situations. I've been in your shoes. I've been, sort of thinking this is a really good idea, and it didn't work out that way. And because, we have client groups and they have certain goals that they need to meet, and there are budgets involved. And I found that if you sharpen your skills and continue to sharpen your skills and develop your confidence, that if you have this idea that you really like and it's not working out really so well, for whatever reason, you're like, oh, you know what? Okay, I'll figure it out again. There's another approach here, and it'll be just as great. You sort of develop that kind of confidence. So, if you come across a situation where you really hope someone really likes the idea and it's not really going that way, and everyone tightens up, kind of thing, that it's okay. That I would say that's an opportunity. And so, talking about those things in school as mentorship, I think is important. In the office, mentorship is kind of an interesting thing about, what people expect mentorship to be like. Is it a day in or day out, setting example and giving people the opportunity to develop themselves? And I think that was really about what our core values at Hewitt was really about. Is I like to think that I'm pretty open about what the pathway of success in our studio is. Like I am a person who is I was pretty direct, probably decisive. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not good. My partner Sean is a good balance for me with my decisive thinking. He's a little bit more reserved that way, which is great. And I'm action oriented. I'd rather try something, see if it works. If it doesn't work, it's fine, rather than being hesitant, not trying something because not sure if it'll work or not. Like, I'm okay with making mistakes, right? And sometimes you do make mistakes. But what I'm trying to say is, like, I will be really direct, saying this is the pathway to success, right? In my studio, this is the pathway to success, is to be smart, be creative, and be principled. If you can do those things, that's what's worked for me, you'll be successful. Like, I will just tell you, like, if you want me to mentor you, there it is, right? There it is.
Wow, thank you for sharing all of these great tips. And for sharing your story. I really enjoyed the story of the Delete Party. That's like,
I have to share that. I got, we have a woman in the office, Brittany. She's like, I really like you. Make sure you tell the Delete Party story. So.
Yeah, it was a great party. It was a great story, rather. Okay, so today, as we know, we will be talking about give yourself permission to choose your own path while sketching the Barcelona Pavilion. So I am going to, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so I'm going to leave the screen on for now as we keep going in conversation.
See, now I think this is kind of a trick, right? So you have a person you're interviewing, right? I was at this interview once where before they were going to ask me a bunch of questions, they gave me a trivia question.
Oh,
Right. And so like, oh, and I didn't know the answer, right? Because, you know, for whatever reason, and put me off balance. And then they're going to ask me a whole bunch of questions. So maybe the trivia question, like loosen people up. So the drawing, you're here to loosen people up, loosen me up. When I start focusing on drawing, I forget because I'm talking about drawing, and then I spill the beans. So I'm on to you.
That's the goal, right?
That's the goal, right? I know, the savvy interviewer, right? That's what you guys have, your tricks.
Yes, yes. So before we really get into it, I would like to ask you, why did you choose the Barcelona Pavilion?
Right. So been to the Barcelona Pavilion, and there's been a couple of times when I've been traveling, seeing projects that have been really moving. And travel for me is really important, going out and seeing the world. I would not have been in Seattle without traveling, right? I did a study abroad program in Rome with the University of Maryland. I was in the Pantheon drawing. So I was sitting there. I think drawing is really about thinking on your feet, especially if you're drawing in really active, open public spaces, you know, with your standing up with your sketchbook in your hand or sitting down. It gives you an ability to think on your feet in a certain way. And so I was drawing in the Pantheon, and this person sat down next to me and asked if I was an architect. And I said, well, I'm an architecture student. And she asked me some other questions, and we just had this nice conversation, and we parted ways in the Pantheon. 2 weeks later, our school traveled to Florence, and we got in late one night, and I didn't see the city at all because we got in late. So on Saturday morning, I got up and toured the city by myself, and I was out in the piazza when they're setting up all the shops for the day. So I was essentially shopping, you know, early morning, Saturday morning shopping or something like that. And I heard my name being called, and I turned around, and it was the same woman that I had a conversation with in the Pantheon 2 weeks before. And we've been together ever since. So so she was from Washington, Seattle, Washington. I was from Washington, D.C., the University of Maryland, essentially. And I had one semester left at Maryland. I finished my semester and I moved to Seattle because that's where she was. And so we are married, and we have a almost 16-year-old, which is like stunning to us. But anyway, so traveling is really important. And Anne and I traveled to Barcelona, and we were touring the Barcelona Pavilion. We got there, I think, first thing in the morning. And the thing about the Barcelona Pavilion is it's, you know, the 1929, you know, German exhibition, you know, Mies van der Rohe, but also Mies van der Rohe had a partner, Lily Reich. And Lily Reich was had more expertise in textiles and furniture making. And through that partnership, some might argue that the romanticism in Mies's work might have a heavy influence by working with Lily. And Lily probably had a much heavier influence in the furniture, such as the Barcelona chair, than might be, you know, commonly known. Because after Mies emigrated to the United States, Lily stayed in Germany, and I don't think the furniture development happened since they parted. Oh, wow. So Barcelona Pavilion is important to me because it signifies travel as a really important thing, seeing those projects firsthand. It's important to me because women like Lily Reich were probably involved with this project. It's important for me because studying this in school, you might learn about a language, an architectural language of horizontal, you know, roof lines, vertical wall planes, you know, how they intersect, how the sort of minimalism of detail, you know, all of the aspects that you might learn about the language of putting together and creating space. It really didn't come through until you actually saw the building, right? And I must say that this is from the original structure is a replica. So it says something about the authenticity of architecture as well, right? Because I think the building was temporary, it was destroyed, it was rebuilt. There's been a couple of replicas that I've seen that have been so powerful. This is one of them. The other one is the Caves of Lascaux. this complete fabrication of the real caves, but it was so moving to see those things. It was so moving to see this one. And the story for this that was so moving, it was not only seeing the complex spatial qualities of the overlapping volumes that are created in such minimal ways between, you know, horizontal roof line versus being on a couple of different levels of an idea of a plinth versus wall planes that intersect in terms of space, but might not create 90-degree corners so much. And that was just such a rich, complex spatial experience. But it was also, I was sitting in the room, which is just to the left of the photo, or sorry, to the right of the photo. That's sort of like one of the doors into the main space, sitting on a Barcelona chair. And since we got there first thing in the morning, I noticed that one of the workers was opening the door. So the door that they were opening was right on the right hand of that screen. It was that sort of curtain wall door. Yes, right there. Okay. When that door is in the closed position, it just creates this 90-degree kind of membrane underneath the strong horizontal line of the roof. But when the door is opened, it's not a hinge on the very end of the door, it's a pivot door, and it's opened right now, and it opens up in a way that becomes seamless as part of these overlapping wall planes, just like the rest of the project. So whether the door is closed or open, it was seamless in the design, and to see that sort of occur in front of you was very moving, very powerful. And so, you know, I just love this sort of idea. Now we do have to say, disclaimer, so the Barcelona Pavilion, since it was an exhibition structure, it only had one function really, right? It was just to make a statement. Right? So, you know, a lot of work that we do, there's lots of functions, especially residential projects that, you know, every room has to do 10 different things, right? It's our office, our dining room, we do all these things. This project just made a statement, but that's okay in my book. And it was really great to see this project, 1929, and it's not a facade building, right? It's really cool in that way. And it was a great learning experience for me to go and see that and draw what I was seeing. I will say when I was taught, when I draw, when I field sketch, is I have a tendency to draw ideas and diagrams and less, say, pretty pictures, right? Okay. It's like, am I supposed to be drawing now? Because I'm talking a lot. Yes. Okay, all right. So you know, I will say that I see, this is the thing. It's like I'm a terrible like multitasker, right?
I know. Me as well. It's hard for me to talk and draw.
Right, but, because what I do is like, you know, like when I met Anne at the Pantheon, I was in a zone. I was, you know, I was drawing, and, you know, it takes a lot of focus to see what you see and not what you think you see. Yes. And that's what drawing is, right? And, you know, what I love about what I'm seeing in this image, and the photographs are a little bit deceiving because there's already an artistic license that was applied to this photograph of a photographer who did this, right? And you see the horizontal symmetry, right? So if you did a line horizontally across this image, you see the power of that reflecting pool that sort of reflects the roof line above you, and it adds another dimension to the space that you would never really kind of just see this as a simple single-story structure, right? Because there's this idea of the space that goes into the reflecting pool. There's that strong roof line that really doesn't have an idea about a wall, and then even the sort of the line of the tree line behind the roof is something that, you know, I think is part of the whole composition. Now this is you see the foregrounds in shadow. Yes. And the shadow is sort of, especially the reflecting pool that is like right in the foreground. That's kind of, I think, giving you a visual anchor. I think we all have a sense of gravity. And sense of gravity, and it feels right if we see something that has a darker, sort of heavier boundary on it. And so the reflecting pool and the shadow at the base of this image, I think, is helpful to balance the composition with the lighter sky. So there's sort of a strong horizontal line, a horizon line that's right in the middle of this whole image. This is very cool. And so that's the kind of things. And then you see like the edge of the reflecting pole that lines up right with that single mullion, that chrome mullion, where the translucent glass is behind the roof line is really cool. Yeah, yeah. And so you're sort of seeing all of these kinds of relationships, and you really wouldn't if you were just taking a quick photograph with your phone or something like that, you know. But that's yeah, I don't know. I go into a zone when I draw. I don't chat. So if you want me to say stuff, you're gonna have to, like, you know.
No problem. So thank you for giving us a download of the Barcelona Pavilion from your perspective. So I'm going to get into the conversation, right? I want to ask you, in what ways in your career path have you given yourself permission to choose your own path? And why is choosing your path, so why is that important?
So maybe another way we could say this question is, I think this is, I think I've learned that it's important, right? I don't think it's something that is like, you know, choosing my own path is really important. That's what I'm going to do. You know, by golly, right? Off I go. I think what happened in hindsight is life happens. And when life happens, how do you react to that? And you know, let's see if I can give you examples. See, this is, I'm gonna stop drawing. Here, start talking. I start talking with my hands. I'm gonna give you like the world's worst drawing here, right? Because so choosing your own path is really important, because I think that's kind of what happens, right? I think we, the big collective we, and maybe I shouldn't say we, because maybe everyone else gets this but me, but I don't know. I mean, you're asking the question, so maybe at least there's two of us that are going like, how come we don't seem to do it the way other people are doing it? And I think if you really sort of, you know, get at it under the surface a little bit, you'll find that everyone has a story. Yeah. And I think sort of coming to the realization of what is reality and what actually happens, that everyone has a story, that might be a more, you know, that realization might be more productive in figuring out your own deal, right? So so let me give you an example. So I, you know, left school, I got a job right away, and I think, you know, I had some, you know, some minor success here and there, you know, in terms of working to my ability, I could say, but not really. I mean, I sort of bobbed up and down, and a lot of this was because there's other stuff going on besides your career, right? You're thinking about, you know, my wife, who's an attorney, you know, that's a very demanding job as well. And as a couple, are you going to make decisions that, you know, might prioritize one career versus the other? And we have these sort of discussions, like work-life balance is, like, for us, this long arc of making decisions that between yourself and your family, you know, or yourself and your significant other, whoever your tribe is, right? And so, you know, she, you know, finished law school. She had the opportunity to get her legal master's degree. So we moved back east after we were in Seattle a little bit. She went to Georgetown. I got another job. So, you know, changing jobs are going to sort of make you sort of bob up and down a little bit in terms of career path. And you know, I don't think I really had a, like, sort of career path kind of mind either. I was just like, I like what I did. I wanted to have a job working on it. I wanted to be happy going to that job and working on things that were meaningful and interesting. And that was kind of about the end of it. You know, that's kind of like what I really wanted. I wanted to really sort of, you know, engage doing interesting work with people who I really liked hearing, you know, and working with and hearing, you know, their ideas about. And so, you know, so you make those decisions that will affect your path. Other things will happen that affect your path. And it really is more important of, like, what are you going to do about it? You know, my wife's a 2-time cancer survivor. And so when those things happen, you know, career, it doesn't really matter. I mean, your perspective about those kinds of things, it's just like, it's a different kind of thing. It's not like there's important, but what you get out of on the other side of those life experiences is a perspective, you know. So when you aren't, you know, in a unstable situation where there's some really serious things going on and things stabilize, and all you have to do is go to work and try to do the best that you can. It's like, boy, isn't that easy compared, you know? So I think those kinds of things and learning about, you know, that will, you know, just those kinds of things happening in life will set you off on a different path. Like you're just going to go, I mean, your path is going to be different. I think most of us have something like that. So maybe the question is, I don't know, maybe the question is we have to stop thinking about that there's this kind of path out there that we're, you know, that we're straying from or creating our own. It's just like we all just have our own, you know. You just have to ask each other really what it is, and just sort of share life experiences with people. So I learned just, I think, because I was just put in this sort of situation that you had to sort of figure this stuff out. And when you do that, you gain perspective. And when you gain perspective, you know, things that maybe seemed hard didn't seem as hard anymore. And then sort of, you know, making the most of the sort of opportunities that you have seem really valuable. You know, like, oh, things are good right now, so let's take advantage of it. Let's find out like what my own abilities are really all about. I don't think I've ever, you know, tried that before. What's that? And then you just get curious, right? So I think, you know, I think it's really important to be curious about like, you know, what could come, and things are going to come at you that are maybe not what you expected, but there are sort of, you know, again, it's like, what do you do about it? Here's a story, right? So again, so here's the story. I was, maybe we've all been in this sort of situation where you're in a meeting, and, you know, and oftentimes when I'm in a meeting, I usually there because I have to contribute something or leading the meeting, especially design meetings. So I was leading this meeting, and, you know, let's call it a diverse group of people who have different objectives and goals. And, you know, you know, for all intents and purposes, it was a contentious meeting. And, you know, there was a lot of challenges happening back between myself and another person who had a different role in the project altogether. And it was one of those really tough meetings. And, you know, it was not a great moment in lean in history, right? Let's call it that. And, you know, I got my cage rattled. And so I made it out of the meeting. And, you know, it was a very upsetting meeting. And I said, well, you know, it was still early and it's like halfway through the day, like you just couldn't go home, right? You just kind of wanted to go home, crawl under the covers or something like that, you know? But, I was going to go for a walk. And I went on this long walk, and basically there was 3 legs to this walk. Now the path was actually like a triangle through the city, but the 3 legs really were about, the first part of the walk was just give yourself time to recover, like just reset, get away from the situation that was very difficult. You know, it's okay to sort of be upset like that. But then the second part of that walk was what actually happened. Like, what was the cause of the challenges? What were people getting after? You know, what was causing you to want to push back in a certain way that, you know, in that case was not effective. And so you sort of think about like what actually happened in a more objective way once you sort of got past the emotional stuff. And then lastly, and this is the most important thing, is what are you going to do about it, right? What are you going to do about it? And I think anytime you have challenges, whether it's in a meeting or whether it's a life experience or a health crisis or something like that, it's the what are you going to do about it that's really, really important. In this case, after I had this walk and what are you going to do about it, I think I learned that the client it was a very complex client, right? So part of the client group had asked us to design essentially a bigger building. The other part that was responsible for pricing maybe not was told that, right? And so we designed them a bigger building. And then the cost got more because the building was bigger. And then they're sort of saying, why does it cost more? And then I had to go into all the numbers, right? Be smart, command all of the issues and be out in front of all the issues that you're responsible for, and identify what actually happened. So that, you know, that's I think a sort of an encapsulated thing about choosing your own path is things will happen in your life that will choose your path for you. And the important thing is, what are you going to do about it? Like, you're going to make a podcast, right? I mean, that's part of your
Yeah.
reaction, right?
Yeah.
You sort of are an action-oriented person, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. Wow. Okay. So you touched on a lot of different things. I want us to focus now on, the aspect of, I guess, taking action, right? What are you going to do about it? So this past year, the pandemic happened, and we've all had to change our lives and the way we usually do things. So how did that affect you when it came to your professional career and being a professor? Like how did the world change for you, and how did you adapt to that?
We get asked these kinds of questions in a bunch of different ways, and it's a really good question. Especially, part of our work at Hewitt, is we had some projects that recently finished, like the Emerald project had recently finished, and really that project's designed to put people together in a city, in a highly dense situation and we think that's a wonderful idea in a really great part of the city, and give places for people to live. And one of the ways in which we help our clients is to promote that idea that this is like, share with potential residents what we think is special about the project. And in the situation of sort of if someone is interested in living downtown versus living in some other scenario, like, why is that a good thing? And in this particular situation where we're asked to stay apart and we're working remotely, I should say we're very lucky that both my wife and I have jobs where we can work remotely. There's a lot of people who that's just not a possibility, so their health is at risk, or it's not a possibility because restaurants are shut down and other places are, entertainment, hospitality places are not operating, and people are not with a job at all. So we're very lucky that way. But as a designer, and the work that we do, it's really important to collaborate ideas. And at Hewitt, we organize ourselves as a classic design studio. So we like to fashion our studio a lot how you would see it in school.
Okay.
And that means pinup space. That means making models, that both design models, presentation models, sometimes are a little bit of both. As far as design exploration, we like to do more and more of that. It's something that I am passionate about, is having physical models, hand-built models, being part of our design exploration. And so it takes us to being in the same room to do those things. And I think what we learned remotely is we picked up techniques, and we're using technology to fabricate in similar ways what we would want to do as if we're together in our office. But I think I am learning that the face-to-face interaction is so valuable, and missed, that I think what it does, it just underscores why cities are great. It underscores why having energy, enthusiasm, just to sort of being in a room with a bunch of people who are excited about what they do is like a really personally energizing thing for me, and how valuable of an idea that is. I mean, I met my wife in these public spaces, which is all about sort of this sort of serendipitous interaction and connections with people. It's like I kind of owe a lot to that idea, don't I? And so, I think that is involved with that. So when we're thinking about towers, I'm thinking about how does these experience, translate into how I design. One, I should say, cities are resilient. This particular pandemic, cities have been part of pandemics over centuries, whether it was 1918 or whether it was bubonic plague, the idea of a city is not going anywhere, in my opinion. They're really great places to be, because you're putting smart people with good ideas next to other smart people with good ideas. but it, it is interesting about, oh, well, we're seeing how valuable it is of this sort of common collection, or the ability, or the people to have the choice of coming together. Even in the Pacific Northwest, where we have a temperate climate, right, where it rains, but it's not like freezing cold. It doesn't get super hot. We're an outdoors kind of group, anyway. And can we make, in my case, when we're working on these vertical communities and these sort of high-rise towers that are sometimes hermetically sealed, and you go in the front door and go in your elevator and go up to your floor, that you don't really see the outside world until you get to your window in your home. And can we kind of think about buildings that are more porous and have more opportunities for collection of like-minded people that maybe just aren't on the rooftop terrace, and thinking about the building that way. We do a lot of that at the street level. We're working on a project with Burrard Properties in the Belltown neighborhood. We are partnered with Herzog and Demeron. They are the design consultant and we are the executive architect, to help Burrard Properties' vision of what they call Archetype Belltown, which is thinking about catering and curating a sort of urban experience that focuses on wellness and focuses on health and focuses on, all of those positive attributes of urban living. And, and Herzog and Demeron would think about a porous first floor. How do we connect the street front with an alley, and how is an alley more than just about accommodating utilitarian services, but being an active edge to the larger context of the urban environment? It's at the north end of a Seattle waterfront development plan. And so, we always think about, ways in which we can reinterpret, sort of this context to make things more porous and have more places for people to, pass by one another and maybe exchange an idea or two, or just get to know someone and build sense of community. And so it's really great to be part of those projects and have clients like Burrard who do have a vision about that is pretty common, that has we hold common values in a vision about sort of an urban experience. So I think this COVID thing is a terrible health crisis. I feel very fortunate I was able to keep my job. I feel very fortunate that the employees we have, they're able to sort of keep their jobs, and that, we have our health. But I think it also, the power of connection is so important. And I think that might have a positive impact on the design work of making sure that those kinds of things are even amplified more than the way we've been thinking about it in the past in our future work.
Wow. So how did you, that was, you speaking in terms of like in a professional setting and what we do in design, but how did that affect you as a design professor, or did it affect you as a design professor?
The students are fantastic. They really are. I was very anxious teaching virtually, and starting in the fall. The university itself did a good job because they had faculty that taught in the spring before and had some experience about, hey, this is, to sort of give you a crash course on what they found was working well and what didn't work well. And there was a lot of information being exchanged of how do you navigate this new thing for us. And so I think the university did a good job on that. But the students were so, I don't know, they are good with technology. I would say, in general, they were very engaged. They whether we're in the studio or outside of the studio, they just seem very eager to learn as much as they can. And so the way we did it, now we didn't get to do as much model building, so that was sort of, unfortunate, because you shouldn't say always and never, but anytime I build a physical model, I seem to always learn something I didn't quite understand before the physical model, right? And so there's the value of that. So we didn't really get all of that process, but they were so accommodating with the technology that we use. We use sort of online boards, so big pinup spaces, and everyone would put all of their work on the boards, and we would draw. And I usually draw a lot when I do teach. I'll be drawing on, like if I'm in the studio, I have trace paper over their work and standing over models or something like that. I could do the same thing virtually. But it was very strange to teach people, and you never really sort of met them face to face. And I hope maybe this next fall they'll still be in the program, and I'll actually meet them, face to face, even though I won't be teaching them. They'll be moved on into the different parts of the program. But at school, they were great adapters. We had most people in the Seattle area. One person was in Taiwan, another person was in Tennessee. So we bridged some different time zones, but they were very accommodating.
Wow, that's nice. So now back to the professional setting.
Yeah.
You work, you work with so many different clients, so many different partners. So I have two questions. The first one is, how are you able to, because, okay, a lot of our clients are not in the field of architecture. So my first question is, how are you able to translate your idea to give them an understanding or to educate them, to be receptive about your idea? And the second question is, how do you also meet their needs? Because again, you work with international partners as well. So how do you meet their needs and their cultural expectations?
Yeah, they're really great questions. Fantastic questions, actually. The way, and I was just explaining this to the team yesterday, is in terms of like, how do you convey ideas to people whose backgrounds aren't necessarily architecture, right? They might be tangentially involved because they're in real estate development, but their background might be finance or business or things like that. Sometimes I do have clients who do have architecture backgrounds and have moved on into the real estate development worlds, and so that has a different situation. But yes, definitely get to know who your clients are. Try to understand what their needs are, and that happens, I think, through the design process. So, like with Burrard Properties, there's expertise in house. They have architectural backgrounds, and have certain values about sort of in Herzog and Demeron, world-class design. And in other groups, they don't. Like, as an example, it is learn a little bit about psychology of like what would motivate someone who, if you're working with a client who's a large organization, you might not be working with the person at the top of their organizational chart. You might be working with their middle manager, and their middle manager's motivations would be different than someone who has a smaller organization who was at the top of their organizational chart. Someone at the top of the chart, for whatever reasons, might be more open to, have a certain vision, right? And more open to sort of having their visions become made real, versus middle management. They have people they have to answer to. And so in some ways, your job is like, how do you arm them so that they can, report to their superiors in a way that is helpful for them, and they can then show their superiors that their investments are in really good shape, in good hands, going in the right direction. So the motivations are going to be different. You sort of have to understand those kinds of realities. Just like a site has a certain fundamental aspects about it. It has a size, shape, topography, climate. It has zoning codes. I mean, those are real world things. There's real world things about motivations of clients too, and understand that. And the way that I do that is when I'm designing, I always am asking myself is like, what would I, if I'm doing this, idea, how would I explain this to the people that I have to explain it to? And if I'm A, am I able to explain it easily, and B, is it valuable to them? Here's an example. So we have a project in South Lake Union. It's a 30-story tower. If you go to our website, Hewitt Seattle, I think it's actually called 222 Dexter. It's the address, but we nicknamed it the Cloud Tower. And the whole idea of this tower was that towers are responsible at multiple scales, right? They have a scale at the human level, the level of the street, the level of the block, the level of the neighborhood, and then towers have this more broader scale and responsibility at the level of the city and the region, right? They're part of a skyline that have this larger context that it responds to, takes its cues from. And so we had this idea of 2 scales and 2 expressions, and the client themselves saw value in having a memorable building, but it had to be memorable so that the spatial qualities of where people were living inside this tower was also valuable. And we were trying all kinds of things to make a memorable tower that was different from the neighborhood, that responded to this larger context. But what was concerning them was sort of the cost, the complexity, the uncertainty in sort of being forward thinking about what the detailing and the realities of technically solving what it is we were proposing. And I didn't learn that until we sort of put 5, 6, 7, 8 ideas in front of them. And I was learning a little bit about what their anxieties were. Mm. And so, you know, and we were struggling to come up with, like, we have this ability to do something memorable. We're not getting there. They're not, you know, happy. They're really appreciating the hard work that we're doing to try to find them an answer. We're not getting there. We had this little stack of brochure books, and you know, because we were doing towers that had a lot of twisted plates in it, and you know, thinking about, you know, sort of these sort of crisscrossing, overlapping balconies on every other floor that people can interact with each other vertically as well as horizontally. Sort of doing all of these things, responding to the natural irregular qualities of the natural features that you see in Seattle, like mountains and sort of bodies of water that were nearby and all that. And you know, having this conversation with my partner, Sean, at the end of the day, and I just sort of squinted and I saw sort of, you know, how this projects could basically take its shape to have these sort of tilted, angled, canted facades, that you would have some units on the inside that the facade would tilt towards the street, some would tilt towards the sky. And we could do it by just having these really basic rectangular floor plates. And we would just shift the floor plate within very, very standard concrete construction techniques. And so we built the model, section model of it first, to show the client not this really interesting form, but to show them how simple it was, to alleviate their anxieties, that we can do this, like everything's going to stack in like no more like a super conventional way. But at the edges of your project, every floor will step it 10 inches one way, 20 inches another way, and then come back again every 4 floors. And we got this sort of cloud-like sort of angular form. It kind of looks like a crinkle cut French fry, honestly. And we kind of like that. It's fun. And so we also had projects in the city that had some angled facades the client could go to and see if the interior spatial qualities had value for them. And so that was a useful thing. And so really we were able to innovate, you know, a sort of a tower project for a client by sort of working through and identifying what their anxieties were, what they were worried about, and how can we design something that gave them a memorable form and spatial qualities for the places in which people were going to live, as well as do it in a way that checked all the boxes that they could take to their bosses and say, hey, we found a solution that is really different in the neighborhood and has value, inherent value in that, but it's also in many ways very simple. You know, another trick that I used when my son was little, Sam, I would say, how would I explain this to Sam? And you know, so you're practicing. How do you explain something to a broad audience? That's really important. We might have sort of design speak at school, and that's also very valuable to be very precise with words. And some words you have to use, maybe fenestration's a better word than window sometimes, but sometimes it's not, you know.
Definitely. So, wow, this has been a great conversation. And right before we go into showing our sketches, and
I have nothing.
That's why I gave a little hint there. And
I'll hurry up. I'm a terrible multitasker. I'm like Gen X, right? We don't multitask, I guess, right? I don't know. Maybe some of us do.
So, so showing our sketches and also taking, you know, questions or I guess thoughts from the audience. I have 2 last questions for you, and this is more about advice to younger professionals. So the first one is, what skill would you encourage young professionals to constantly practice? And what advice would you give someone that's just starting out their career?
Yes, constantly practice. that's the advice I would give. The more you do, you know, I have, so I'm interested in organizational psychology, right? And so when you get into sort of those things, it's really interesting to me. I don't know why, it just is, I guess, because I work with teams, work with people. And, you know, you sort of learn that, you know, quantity is not the opposite of quality, right? Quantity is on the pathway to quality, right? The more you do something, like when we do buildings, it's like we're very iterative. You just do it over and over and over again. Like I know, like when we came up with the cloud tower idea, that was like 10, 12, like fully developed kind of ideas into the projects that it's like playing a board game, right? It's like you can learn the rules of the game by reading on the rules on the inside of the box, but you don't really get good at it unless you play the game a lot. So I would say play the game a lot. You know, the advice that I give to people if they want to sort of matriculate, you know, sort of like in a design track, is recognize an opportunity and what it actually looks like. Right. When I first started, I was asked to sort of look at this one little bridge condition that was a back of house service, what we were nicknaming the truck bridge, and it had a structural solution for under it. And I sort of like look three-dimensionally put that together, and I could quickly sort of sketch out what that looked like. But then I would say, okay, I understand the basic concepts of what they want to do for that particular piece, but then also the other pieces in and around it. And like, how can I think about that in 5 or 6 other different ways? And then can I have a conversation with the people? Like first I have to do exactly what they asked me to do. And then I said, well, how can we reinterpret this and do it different ways? And I would do 5 or 6 other versions of that and have a conversation with them, with the people who are assigning me my tasks. And then if there's value in that, they were going to keep asking me to do things like that, right? So understand what opportunity looks like. It wasn't like people say, hey, we have a project for you and you were going to be the designer. Congratulations, you start Tuesday. It never happened that way for me. And then I think second thing you do is identify if there's any barriers, either structurally in the office or with just the way your station of life currently is. Are there any barriers in the way of that's preventing you? Or maybe that it's telling you that, you know, the timing isn't just there right for you to take the next step, but you're in the right step right now to sort of develop, you know, your skills. And then lastly, I would say have realistic expectations. You know, I still don't think I'm good at what I do for like, you know, I'm always wanting to get better. I'm always wanting to learn. But, you know, I think, you know, it wasn't until like maybe I was in my, you know, 40s, and I'm still in my 40s, about, you know, sort of, you know, being fully responsible for the work that we're doing in the architecture studio. And again, that word responsible is the operative word here. And that's very much a word that resonates with me about like leadership. It's really about responsibility, not authority. And you know, and so it just is. I did a terrible job, I think, on my.
Do you want to show us?
No, because I'm going through line and horizontal stuff, and I was just talking the whole time, and you know, it's like I don't have much at all to show. I don't know, just sort of just diagramming stuff, and not even have a chance to do that.
Wait, let me show you mine.
So usually when I'm in meetings, I'm talking. I gotta focus on what I'm gonna say. I don't want, you know.
So this is what I.
Yeah, look at that. So you've got the basics down. That's great.
Yes. If anyone else would like to share, you're more than welcome to just turn on your video and share. If not, you can always post it on Instagram, and we'll see it from there.
Yeah, the ones that weren't having a conversation at the time.
So I have a question from Daniel in the chat. So it says, out of curiosity, I've heard Seattle has an abandoned city beneath the modern streets of Seattle. Curious to know how Seattle architects encounter any projects that have to interact with the ruined city, and if it has any influence on the modern city. Is that something architects have to think about when they start a large development in that area of the city?
Right. Well, I think there's a really interesting, good question. And there's a couple ways to think about this, the technical aspects, and then there is like, what are the sort of design opportunities? I think what Daniel's referring to is in the historic district in Pioneer Square. And I think a lot of cities kind of went through this. Like there's sort of like a basement level, and there's sidewalks that are since are at a higher elevation than where they were when they previously were. And so there's sort of there's this little tourist thing that you can do in this called Seattle Underground. It's in the south end of the city, where it's basically showing sort of the built up level of where the city is today. And a lot of them, what you would call, are area ways underneath the sidewalk. So there's like utility area ways in some sections, right? So it's not like this entire city, there's a city under a city kind of thing. In certain sections, there's these underground basement level vestiges of a past late 19th century, early 20th century part of the city, that urban development where the sort of, the cities, the streets and everything sort of were raised up. And we have these areaways, and there's some areaways as well as the downtown. There's also been regrades in the city. So in the early 20th century, there was a couple of major regrades. There was a famous one, which was what we call the Denny regrade, which is in the Denny Triangle in the northeast part of the city, where there's a hill. And they basically took water cannons and they leveled, a whole hill in the city to make more developable land and sort of reconfigure the shoreline. I mean, to talk about an environmental disaster, if you do something like that today, I think, I think there's also some regrades that happened in the south end of the city. There was a Jackson Street regrade. And so they're sort of leveling off sections of the city. And so, you would see sort of like what they call holdout houses. There'd be houses on top of a hill that was sort of on the steep hill. They would regraded everything around it. And there's a house on top of the hill. So if you look, there's historical photos about those. So there's been major sort of, big projects like that, along with the Great Fire, I think it was 1889. So for us, we do some projects that are in those areas. And, and we do projects in Pioneer Square, a lot of it is what was once tidal flat. And so technically the soils are not suitable for below grade structures, and you have to build your foundations a certain way, sort of, call them like a bathtub kind of construction, or you don't really build much below grade. You have big long piers, a different sort of foundation design. So there's technical things. But what's really interesting for me as a designer is like, thinking about like, because we're working on a project in the south end of the city that was once over the water. And when they're doing regrades, there's whole city blocks that were up on piers. And so the life of the city's here, and the topography is below it, and it's all up in piers. And that's part of that site. That's the history of that site. There are some neighborhoods that, there was, steep topography that was created through because of glaciers. And that's part of the site. And that's interesting. And that can be just as influential as, the current present day immediate neighboring context. And so we do think about those kinds of things when we're thinking about the work that we're doing at Hewitt. And how can that sort of, that past, present, future context also come into play of our thinking today. I think it's really interesting. It's like you're working on a site that was once over water. And what does that mean? And how can that be reflected? And what kinds of cues can that be thought about and made visible in new work that we do?
Wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that about Seattle.
Yeah, I mean, it has its, Seattle's, it's an interesting place. But yeah, you can go and do an underground tour, and you can experience some of those, what was street level is now basement level kind of things.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for joining us today. Let me just go back to my slide really quickly. So we took the questions. And again, of course, Design Times community. So if you're interested, please head over to layersofdesign.online. And yes, that's it. everyone. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for joining us. Like I said, it's been a great conversation. I've learned so much, and I really enjoyed sketching with you, sort of, and speaking with you. And to everyone that joined, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, thank you for everyone to join, and thank you for inviting me on your show and having a conversation, more conversation than sketching on my part, I'm afraid, but what a wonderful idea. And thank you again.